I've gone back and forth today, vacillating on whether or not I should share this story. I've decided to go ahead and share my near death suicide story because, obviously, it has a happy ending. So let's go back about 11 years ago. In 2012, my life was completely upside down and inside out. It was absolutely terrible. I experienced a financial crisis and lost everything. I was evicted from my condo. I lost ownership of my car and ultimately had to move in with my grandmother because I had nowhere else to go. Now, don't get me wrong, I didn't mind moving in with my grandmother because my grandmother was actually my mother. I was raised by my grandmother, and the relationship with my birth mother was and is a terrible one. Now, what made things challenging and really bad is my grandmother at this time was in the throes of the disease Alzheimer's, and her daughter, my birth mother, was there living with my grandmother, caring for her because my grandmother could no longer live on her own. So I was having to contend with being face to face with my birth mother every day, a person I hadn't been around for a number of years because we don't particularly care for each other at all. The relationship was terrible and is terrible to this very day. We do not speak. I haven't seen or spoken to my mother in about 10 years. So, all that said, I'd suffered from depression since I was a little kid, bullied in school and being mistreated by my birth mother growing up. Life had been tough, and having this financial crisis happen to me at this time only exacerbated my depression and the suicidal ideations because it was just another thing I had to deal with, on top of everything else I had experienced throughout my entire life. So I ultimately reached my breaking point and was ready to give up and let go. I was driving around the city when this thought just popped into my head. I was very upset. I was driving and crying, and the thought just came to me that I didn't have to endure this anymore. I could just simply let go. And in that exact moment, I felt light as a feather, and it was no longer about, well, should I do this, should I not? I made a decision that this would be the best thing to do, and in making the decision, I stopped crying, and I felt good. It was so weird. I felt free. There would be no more crying, no more trying, no more trying to measure up, no more comparing myself to other people, no more anything. All of the pain stops just with this one action. And I felt like I'll be free and I won't have any problems anymore. I've tried very hard to do the right thing and to give life a chance. And it's just not working for me. And I'm not happy here. I don't want to be here anymore. That's how I felt. A year prior to this, I'd met Janet Jackson in person, and I kind of alluded to her that I wasn't well and that my mental was not well. And I remember her looking at me with eyes of concern and pity. After meeting her, a friend had remarked to me that I could, quote, die now since I've met Janet Jackson and she means so much to me. And I remember remarking to my friend and saying, "You're right, I can die now." For me, meeting her was just another reason to say, it's okay to go now. So in making the decision to end my life, I decided that I was going to have a last holiday, like the Queen Latifah movie, where she goes and pretty much tries to have the time of her life before she dies. I only had a few $100s to my name at this time, and I decided that I was going to get on the casino bus and go to Metropolis, Illinois, get me a hotel room, gamble away what little money I had left, eat all of my favorite food at the all-you-can-eat buffet, have a few drinks, go back to my hotel room, and simply call it a life. I'd packed a bag and put it in my trunk. Everything was ready. The decision was made. There was just one thing I had to do. On this particular day, my mother had asked me to take her to the grocery store and to a pharmacy to get medication for my grandmother. And I told her that I would. And we got in the car together and we started down the highway. And my intention was to harm my mother the way that she'd harmed me so many times in my life. So I decided that I was going to tell her what I was going to do. I told her, after I take you to the grocery store and take you to the pharmacy, I'm leaving and I'm never coming back again. And I said it in a way that she would understand exactly what I meant, because we'd had the conversation about my suicidal ideations before. This totally backfired on me because something happened that I wasn't expecting. I'm driving my car, she's in the passenger seat, and I look over at her, and she didn't say a word. She was looking straight ahead. But I'll never forget the way I felt when I saw her face. I'd never seen her look so afraid and so scared before in my entire life. She looked like a little girl, and I could tell that she knew something terrible was looming and that there was really nothing she could do about it. She looked pitiful, and at that exact moment I realized trying to hurt her was hurting me, because I saw how much it truly hurt her to hear me say what I just said to her. So I start ranting and raving and crying while I'm driving, and the tension was so thick in the car you could cut it with a knife. And still, she said nothing. I went on and on and on about how terrible my life was and how I was finally going to be free and that this was over and that there was nothing that anyone could do about it. Now we take the exit from the interstate, and I notice that my car is starting to lose power. I'm pressing the gas, but the car is barely moving, and it starts to basically die. And in that exact moment, I could tell that this was some kind of prevention, which made me absolutely livid. My car was always a dependable car, so I could feel and sense something was happening here to prevent me from doing what I planned to do. I wound up pulling into a Kmart parking lot. I got out of the car, I raised the hood, and I'm still screaming and yelling because now I know that my plans have been foiled, and now I've told my mother, so now there's time for her to get professionals to come in and intervene because she knows what my plans are. So I'm screaming to the top of my lungs that something is effing with me. And whatever this something is that's trying to prevent this looming suicide attempt is trying to get me to live, and I don't want to anymore. I remember my mother getting out of the car, and I remember her still being very afraid, and she just simply said to me, "Maybe it's not effing with you. Maybe it's trying to stop you." After she says this, she says, "The car is still running. Let's just go back to your grandmother's house and let's just go home. Let's not go to the grocery store. Let's not go to the pharmacy. Let's not do anything." So we both get back in the car. The car is barely running, but we were only a couple of miles out from my grandmother's home, so we didn't have far to go to get back home. We pull up in my grandmother's driveway, and before I can put the car and park, it goes dead. Almost as if I was only meant to get that far. I was only meant just to get back to my grandmother's house where I'd be safe from myself. Later this same day, after I had a little time to calm down, my mother said to me, "If you ever go through with this, I might as well just die with you." She said, "If you ever do this and you ever leave me in this way, I'll die too," is what she said to me. I could still sense and see the fear in her. Now, about my car. A few days later, I got into the car, it started up, except it was still kind of barely going. There was a repair shop right around the corner from my grandmother's house where I'd been taking my car for years. So I drive up there, I tell them what happened, I'm not sure what's going on with my car. So the lady who owned the shop called me maybe about 2 hours after I dropped the car off, and she told me, "Oh, your car is ready." And I'm like, "Well, what's wrong with it?" And she told me nothing. She goes on to explain, "Well, your compressor locked up because your air conditioning has gone out. There's nothing wrong with the car. We just bypassed the compressor. And if you don't have the money to get it fixed, or if you don't want to get it fixed, you'll just have to drive without air conditioning, but there's really nothing wrong with the car." I was dumbfounded at that time, and I thought to myself, wow, here's another indicator that something truly is trying to stop me. There was actually nothing wrong with my car. Nothing. Got the car, and it was running just fine. Whatever this supposed divine intervention was, just threw a monkey wrench at my car to stop me at the moment. However, I still decided that I would not be outdone and that this life was over, and I didn't care what was trying to stop me. I was going to have my way. Though I'd calmed down and kind of got my head together, what I decided to do was I was just going to make another plan at another time, and I wasn't going to tell anybody. That way I could go through with it, nobody would know, and nobody would have the opportunity to get mental health involved. Nobody would have the opportunity to try and stop me. I would just keep it to myself this time and make sure it happened the way I wanted it to happen. So my new plan at this time was to overdose on very powerful hypertension medication I was taking at the time. And during this time, I didn't have health insurance. I didn't have a job. So I was getting medication from a place that's kind of like your local health department. However, this particular health department had an in-house pharmacy where you could get your medication, your name brand medication, for very cheap, like $4 a prescription. But the health department was always so busy with so many people needing aid and needing medication and seeing the student doctors that were there. You would have to call in your medication to make sure that you could get it within probably about 30 minutes after you arrived there. Otherwise, you'd have to wait for a very long time to have that prescription filled. So I get on my cell phone and I called the health department to have my prescription filled and to pick up the medication the next day. However, when I make the call on my cell phone, I hear this.
"We're sorry, your call cannot be completed as dialed. Please check the number and try again."
Now, I had this pharmacy number saved in my cell phone, so I wasn't misdialing, so I didn't really understand what was going on. So I just make the same phone call again, and again, I hear this.
"We're sorry, your call cannot be completed as dialed. Please check the number and try again."
I wound up calling the pharmacy of the health department 14 times in a row, and 14 times I heard this.
"We're sorry, your call cannot be completed as dialed. Please check the number and try again."
So now I'm getting angry again, and I feel like I'm in the reverse of those Final Destination movies where the Grim Reaper or Death is chasing the characters of the movie, but in my case, life was chasing me instead. But at this point, I am determined that this is going to happen, and I'm going to make it happen. So I get on my grandmother's landline, and when I call the phone number, this time it rings, but still, I hear this again.
"We're sorry, your call cannot be completed as dialed. Please check the number and try again."
So I call 6 or 7 more times in a row, and of course, every time that I call, even though it rings this time, I hear this.
"We're sorry, your call cannot be completed as dialed. Please check the number and try again."
So now I'm convinced that this isn't a coincidence. There's just something wrong with the pharmacy's phone. So that means I'm going to have to go to the pharmacy and wait for the medication. So I get up, put on my clothes, get in my car, and I'm driving to the pharmacy. As I'm driving, I'm saying to myself, this is just a coincidence. There's something wrong with their phone, and that this is not some divine intervention. It can't be. Who am I to be saved? People take their lives every single day. How am I any different from anyone else? Why would I somehow be spared when other people do this all the time? You hear about it all the time. And I'm trying to convince myself that this is not divine intervention. I arrive at the health department, go inside, go to the in-house pharmacy, and before I could confirm and ask the question, "What's wrong with your phones? I've been trying to reach you all day," the pharmacy tech motions for me to please wait with her hand as she answers a ringing phone and says, "How can I help you?" At this point, I'm freaking out and I'm like, this cannot be real. She finishes the phone call very quickly and says, "How can I help you?" And I told her, "I've been trying to reach you all day. What's wrong with your phones?" She said, "Nothing. You saw me. I was just on the phone. There's nothing wrong with our phones." And I told her, "Oh, yes, it is, because I called from my cell phone and I couldn't get through. Then I called from a landline and I still couldn't get through." And she's like, "Well, you just saw me hang up the phone. Did you need a prescription filled?" And I told her yes. And she said, "Well, it's going to be about an hour. Please have a seat and we'll call you when it's ready." So I go and I sit down in the waiting area, and I don't know what this was that spoke to me. It wasn't a voice that I could hear with my ears, but it was a voice kind of in my head. And the voice said the following: "Whenever you try this, if you ever try it again, we will always stop you." Now, at this point, I am absolutely certain that I have lost my mind, that something is wrong. Now I'm hearing voices in my head telling me that if I ever try to take my life again, that whoever they are will stop me. So I get my prescription and I'm walking back out to my car, except I'm looking outside as if I'm looking for someone else to try and stop me. I thought to myself, well, I'm going to come outside and my car is going to be on bricks because someone's going to steal my tires or something to keep me from going through with my plan. At this point, I'm mad and I'm saying, wow, I can't even end my life right. I can't even do that. I get to my car, I sit down, and I hear the same voice in my head saying, "We will always stop you." And in that moment, I just said, okay, I won't do it. And then I started to laugh to myself a little bit. And I said to myself, wow, it takes all of this for me to get the message. And that this is indeed a divine intervention to save my life. All day today, I've been thinking to myself throughout my entire life, I wish the version of me now, my God self, could go back to my younger self when I was 20, 25, and hug myself, hold my own hand, and tell myself that everything's going to be just fine, and that in time I will see the truth about life, I will see the truth about myself. Now I realize that it was divine intervention, and that divine intervention was myself, my God self. I didn't know it then, but I definitely know it now. When I had the visions earlier today of going to embrace myself and to tell myself that I loved myself and that I was the most important person in the world and that I could do anything, I realized it was me who stopped my car. I realized that it was me who didn't let those phone calls go through to get that medication to end my life. I literally was my own divine intervention and saved myself. I certainly hope that this story reaches and touches someone and helps someone. I want to thank you guys so much for listening to the end, hopefully. And thanks for supporting this channel. I am so grateful for the teachings of Neville Goddard in learning and embracing who I truly am. And I hope that you do too. Until next time, bye everybody.